At 19, she was forced to marry a millionaire cowboy. But his wedding gift shocked thee. The town of Briar Hollow always smelled like cold iron in winter. Not the clean kind, not snow and pine, but old metal, damp wood, and breath held too long in tight chests. December pressed down hard that year, the sky a dull sheet of tin, the ground frozen stiff enough to punish careless boots. Even the horses moved quieter, steam curling from their nostrils like secrets they didn't want to tell. At 19, Clara Mayfield learned how loud silence could be. It followed her through the church doors that morning, followed her down the narrow aisle dusted with tracked-in snow, followed her all the way to the front, where the millionaire cowboy waited. Ethan Blackridge stood alone beneath the bare rafters, hat in his hands, shoulders broad as the land he owned. Everyone in Briar Hollow knew his name. They knew his ranch stretched farther than the eye could travel without losing hope. They knew he'd struck oil under winter pasture and cattle gold before that. They knew he could buy the town twice and still have enough left to never explain himself. What they didn't know was why he'd chosen her. Clara kept her eyes forward. Not on him, not on the pews packed with townsfolk pretending not to stare. Not on her mother's clenched hands or her father's rigid jaw, set like a man who'd signed something he could never take back. The cold seeped through the thin soles of her shoes. Her dress was ivory but felt gray, heavy with borrowed lace and expectations. It had been altered 3 times to fit her, because nothing in her life had ever fit right without being pulled or pinned. The preacher's voice droned softly, respectful, cautious. Even God, it seemed, spoke carefully around Ethan Blackridge. Clara remembered the night it had all been decided. No shouting, no drama. Just Ethan at their kitchen table, snow melting off his coat, hands folded like he was there to buy land instead of a life. "I'll marry her," he'd said calmly. "And I'll clear your debts by morning." Her father hadn't asked why. Her mother hadn't cried. And Clara, still smelling of soap and schoolbooks, still thinking her life ran forward instead of closing in, had gone very still, like prey that knows the trap has already snapped. Now the trap had ribbons. When the preacher asked for her vows, Clara's voice came out steady enough to surprise her. Each word landed clean, practiced, empty. She said, "I do," the way someone says, "It's fine," when it isn't. Ethan's voice was low, even, unrushed. He didn't look at the crowd when he spoke, only at her, like she was the only fixed point in a shifting world. That unsettled her more than the whispers ever could. When the final words were spoken, when the preacher stepped back and the room released a breath it didn't realize it had been holding, the sound came. Applause. Soft at first, then louder. The kind reserved for spectacles, not love. Outside the wind cut sharp and mean. Snowflakes drifted sideways, catching in Clara's hair, melting against her neck. Someone wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. She didn't see who. Ethan did not touch her. Not then. They stood on the church steps while the town gathered, faces pinched red from cold and curiosity. Briar Hollow leaned in, eager for the ending to a story it had already decided to tell itself. She felt it before she saw it, the shift in attention, the way heads turned, the way murmurs slid into a hush. A wagon rolled forward from the street, not one of Ethan's working wagons. This one was dark-stained oak, freshly polished, iron bands gleaming even under the dull winter light. It stopped directly in front of the church steps, horses stamping impatiently, breath fogging thick in the air. Ethan stepped forward at last. "For the bride," he said, his voice carried, not loud, certain. A ranch hand climbed down and opened the back of the wagon. The town gasped. Inside was not jewelry, not silk, not money. It was a house, or rather, everything that made one. Disassembled walls, numbered and stacked, windows already glazed, a cast-iron stove bolted into place, a carved wooden door, wrapped carefully in canvas. Even the chimney stones were there, bundled tight like something precious. Clara stared, her heart knocking once, hard, against her ribs. Ethan turned to her then, finally close enough that she could see the faint scar at his jaw, the lines at the corners of his eyes that didn't belong to a man his age. "I had it built early," he said quietly, "before the snow set in. It'll go up on the south ridge, warm, sheltered from the wind." She didn't know what to say. The town didn't either. A house meant permanence, roots, choice. Whispers broke loose like birds startled from bare branches. Why there? That land's not even... He didn't have to. What's he planning? Clara's hands trembled inside her gloves. This wasn't part of the bargain. There had been no talk of gifts, no mention of anything beyond obligation. She looked at him then, really looked. Ethan Blackridge wasn't smiling. He was watching her, waiting, not for gratitude, not for obedience, but for something else she couldn't yet name. Snow settled on the wagon roof, on the stacked walls, on the future she hadn't chosen. And for the first time since winter began, Clara felt something crack beneath the cold. Not hope, not fear, but the quiet, dangerous awareness that whatever this marriage was, it was not going to be simple. The town would talk for weeks, but they had no idea what that gift truly meant, or how deeply it would change everything. The South Ridge lay quiet beneath its coat of snow, a long white spine rising beyond the town like something sleeping and watchful. Clara had never been there before. Few people had. The wind hit harder up high, and superstition clung to the place. Stories of cattle lost, fences swallowed, men turning back with frostbitten hands and unfinished thoughts. That was where Ethan Blackridge took her. They rode in silence the morning after the wedding. No procession, no witnesses. Just the creak of leather, the dull thud of hooves breaking crusted snow, and the sky hanging low enough to press against Clara's temples. She sat stiff in the saddle, gloved hands tight on the reins, breath fogging in short bursts. Ethan rode slightly ahead, always aware of her without looking back. He moved like a man used to listening to land instead of people. When the ridge finally opened, she saw it. The house stood finished against the white, small, solid, dark timber cut clean against the snow. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin and steady. Not grand, not showy, but built with care that showed in every line. It wasn't facing the ranch, it was facing the valley, facing away from Briar Hollow. Clara slid down from the horse slowly, boots sinking into fresh powder. The cold burned her cheeks, her nose, her fingers even through wool. She stared at the house like it might speak first. "I had the stove lit before dawn," Ethan said. "It'll be warm inside." She nodded once. Inside, the air held heat and the scent of pine sap and iron. The floorboards were new, but already scuffed, as if someone had walked them while thinking hard. There was a single table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed against the far wall, hooks for coats, shelves waiting to be filled. A home, stripped down to essentials. "This is mine?" she asked finally. Ethan set his hat down carefully. "It's yours," he corrected. "I'll stay at the main house unless you ask otherwise." The words landed heavy. She turned to him sharply. "Why?" He met her gaze without flinching. "Because I didn't buy a wife, and I won't cage one." The fire popped softly behind them. Outside, the wind scraped the walls like it wanted in. "You don't owe me gratitude," he continued, quieter now. "And you don't owe me affection. This marriage clears your family's name and keeps creditors out of their door. That's the agreement." "And you?" she asked. "What do you get?" A pause, long enough to feel deliberate. "Peace," he said at last. "Or at least the chance at it." She didn't believe him. Not fully. But she believed he believed himself. That first week passed slow, measured by light and cold. Clara learned the rhythm of the house, how the wind sang through the eaves at night, how frost painted the inside of the windows in the morning. She learned the stove, the careful feeding of fire. She learned how silence could stretch without snapping. Ethan came each day, sometimes with supplies, sometimes just to check the chimney, the fence line, the path cut through snow. He never stayed long, never crossed the line she hadn't drawn, but felt all the same. The town, meanwhile, boiled. Briar Hollow did not like unanswered questions, and this marriage had left too many. They said Clara was a purchased thing, tucked away to be hidden. They said Ethan was ashamed of her. They said worse. On the 8th day, Clara rode into town alone. The cold followed her down the ridge, sharp and insistent. Eyes followed her too. She felt them from behind frosted windows, from doorways, from men pretending to adjust harnesses and women pretending not to look. At the mercantile, the clerk hesitated before taking her money. Mr. Blackridge usually, "I'm Mrs. Blackridge," Clara said evenly, "and I'll speak for myself." The room went still. Later, outside the church, she heard it. "You think he bought her to keep her quiet? Girl's barely out of school. He's got no heirs, needs one. She'll thaw come spring, they always do." Clara kept walking, but the words followed her all the way back up the ridge, clinging like ice. That night, the storm came, not snow, wind. It screamed across the land, rattling the walls, forcing itself through every weakness it could find. Clara fed the fire until her arms ached, then wrapped herself in blankets and listened as the house held. A knock came after midnight. She froze, then heard his voice muffled by the wind. "Clara, it's me." She opened the door to a wall of cold, and Ethan, coat iced white, hair whipped loose, eyes sharp with concern. "Chimney at the main house cracked," he said. "I'll stay here till the wind dies." She stepped aside without a word. He did not touch her. He slept in the chair by the fire, boots on, head tilted back, breath steady. She watched him for a long time, before sleep finally took her. In the morning, the storm lay spent and scattered. Snow drifted high against the door. The world felt muffled, held. Ethan rose, stretched, poured coffee without asking. They stood side by side, cups warming their hands. "This won't be easy," she said quietly. "No," he agreed. "But it's honest," she added. That earned her a look. Not surprised. Something closer to respect. Outside, the ridge held fast. And down in Briar Hollow, the town began to realize the story it thought it knew was slipping beyond its control. Winter deepened its grip as January settled in. Snow no longer arrived gently. It came in heavy sheets that erased tracks within hours, reshaped the land overnight, and turned distance into something dangerous. The ridge felt farther from Briar Hollow now, not just in miles, but in meaning. Up there, time moved slower. Each day measured by firewood stacked, water hauled, bread baked thick and dense enough to last. Clara grew stronger without noticing, her hands roughened, her shoulders stopped aching from the cold. She learned how to split kindling without wasting energy, how to patch wool with fingers numbed just short of pain. She learned the land's moods, the way the wind warned before a storm, the way silence settled too neatly before trouble. Ethan noticed everything. He never commented on her changes, but he adjusted around them, left heavier tools closer to the door, brought seeds and soil-rich dirt, even though planting season was months away. When she mentioned once that the ridge felt lonely at night, he brought a second lantern and left it without explanation. They spoke more now, not about feelings, about practical things. But sometimes, rarely, the talk slipped. "My mother hated winter," Clara said one evening, staring into the fire. "Said it showed you what would still love you when everything else went quiet." Ethan nodded. "My father used to say winter strips the lies clean off a man." "And what did he say about love?" A pause. Then softly, "Nothing worth keeping was easy to hold." The town made its move before February ended. It started small, a delivery delayed. A letter returned unopened. A merchant suddenly unwilling to extend credit. "Not to her," he said. "Not without Mr. Blackridge present." Then came the visit. 3 women climbed the ridge one gray afternoon, skirts lifted against the snow, boots soaked through. They stood stiff at the door while Clara wiped her hands and let them in. "We just wanted to see how you were settling," said Mrs. Alder, lips thin with practiced concern. Their eyes traveled the room, counted chairs, noted the single bed. "So much space," another murmured, "for one person." Clara met their gazes evenly. "I like it quiet." "And Ethan?" Mrs. Alder asked. "Does he visit often?" "Often enough." They exchanged looks. "You're young," the third woman said, softer now. "Winter marriages are difficult." Clara smiled, slow and polite. "So are winter truths." They left soon after. That night Ethan arrived later than usual, jaw tight, eyes dark with something restrained. "They came to the main house first," he said. "Asked questions." "And?" Clara asked. "I told them the same thing I've told everyone else," he replied. "That my wife's happiness is not a town matter." The word wife settled between them, heavier than before. Later, as they stood on the porch watching snow drift sideways, Clara asked, "Why did you really choose me?" Ethan didn't answer right away. When I came to your house that night, he said finally, I expected your father to beg, or rage, or bargain. And instead, you met my eyes. You didn't plead. You didn't flinch. You looked like someone deciding whether the price was survivable. She swallowed. It was. He nodded. That kind of strength doesn't bend easy. I figured if anyone could live free up here, it'd be you. And love? She asked quietly. His breath fogged between them. Love doesn't grow under debt and fear. I wanted to give it room, or let it die honest. The truth of that pressed against her ribs. February broke with a scream of wind and white. The storm came fast and wrong, swallowing the ridge before either of them could reach shelter together. Ethan's horse slipped near the tree line, leg twisted bad. By the time they got the animal down, Ethan's hands were shaking, face pale beneath frost. They barely made it inside. The fire roared. Clara stripped his coat, rubbed warmth back into his fingers, her movements sharp and sure. She didn't think. There was no room for it. When the worst passed, he sat slumped against the wall, eyes closed, breath slowing. You could have left me, he murmured. She shook her head. Not how I was raised. He looked at her then, really looked. Stay, he said. Not command, not plea, just truth. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. Outside, the storm howled, furious at what it couldn't break. Inside, something shifted. Not passion, not promise, trust. The kind earned only when winter shows its teeth and finds you still standing. Down in Briar Hollow, the town watched the ridge and waited. They sensed change. They just didn't know yet who it would cost. March arrived sharp and deceptive. The days stretched longer, the light lingering like a promise, but winter hadn't loosened its grip. Snow still ruled the ridge, hardened now, crusted over, hiding slick ice beneath. It was the most dangerous kind of season, the one that tricked people into lowering their guard. That was when Briar Hollow struck. It began with a knock that didn't belong to the wind. Clara opened the door to find her father standing stiff in the snow, coat too thin, hat clenched in both hands like he'd forgotten how to wear it. Two men waited behind him, town councilmen, faces carved from concern and calculation. Clara, her father said, voice brittle, we need to talk. She didn't step aside immediately. The cold crept in around them, biting at ankles and breath. Ethan appeared at her shoulder, silent but solid. Inside, the fire crackled low. The men didn't sit, neither did Ethan. The town's in trouble, one councilman began. Banks failing, credits drying up, folks are panicking. And that's my concern? Clara asked. Her father flinched. You're married to the only man who can stabilize things, the other man said. Ethan Blackridge has resources, influence. Ethan's jaw tightened. You should have come to me directly. We did, the first man replied. You declined. I declined terms, Ethan corrected, not aid. Clara looked between them. What do you want? Silence. Then her father spoke, voice barely holding. They want you to move back into town, publicly. Live as husband and wife, properly. Reassure people. Show unity. Clara felt the words like ice down her spine. A display, she said softly, to calm the market. Yes, her father said, just until spring. She turned to Ethan. He met her eyes, steady. I won't force you. The councilman shifted, uneasy. But, Ethan continued, I won't let them use you either. The first man bristled. This isn't about use. It's about responsibility. No, Ethan said. It's about fear. Clara's hands curled into fists. I'll decide, she said. Everyone went still. She stepped forward, voice clear despite the tremor in her chest. I'll come to town, on one condition. The men leaned in. That my home stays on the ridge, and when this is over I return there. No arguments, no delays. They hesitated. Ethan spoke before they could. Agreed. The move happened fast. Within days, Clara found herself in the Black Ridge main house, large, echoing, filled with servants who didn't know how to look at her. The bed was enormous, the halls too wide. The windows faced the town like watching eyes. Ethan gave her space, too much maybe. At night they lay separated by inches that felt like miles. The town watched everything, how she dressed, How she spoke, whether she smiled. They speculated endlessly. Must have worn him down. Told you she'd end up here. Money changes people. Clara endured it quietly. She smiled when required, attended dinners, sat beside Ethan at meetings, her presence a symbol rather than a person. But something in her hardened. One evening, after a particularly pointed dinner, she followed Ethan into his study. "You're letting them think they own me," she said. He turned slowly. "No, I'm letting them think they're safe. And when they aren't, then they'll learn." She stepped closer. "I didn't marry you to be hidden or paraded." "I know," he said softly. "Then see me." He did. Something broke open that night, not with urgency, not with desperation, but with choice. Hands finding hands, words spoken low, honest, unguarded. Outside, winter rattled the windows. Inside, they closed the distance. By early April, the bank stabilized, the town breathed easier, and Briar Hollow began to relax its grip. That was when Ethan gave the second gift, not announced, not displayed. He handed Clara a folded deed one morning at breakfast. "The ridge," he said. "It's in your name now, fully, no conditions." Her breath caught. "Why?" she whispered. "Because no one should ever wonder if their home can be taken." Tears burned. She didn't let them fall. They returned to the ridge the same day. Spring would come, eventually, but winter had already done its work. It had stripped them bare, and left behind something real. April did not arrive gently on the ridge. It crept in sideways, carried on thawing winds and nights that still bit hard enough to remind you winter was only pretending to loosen its hold. Snow retreated in patches, revealing dark earth beneath, muddy, raw, alive. The kind of ground that stained boots and asked you to choose every step carefully. Clara liked that. It felt honest. She stood at the window one morning, watching fog lift slowly from the valley, her breath still fogging the glass. The house felt different now, not quieter, steadier, as if the walls had finally accepted her voice, her weight, her presence. Behind her, Ethan worked at the table, repairing a cracked harness. He moved with practiced ease, sleeves rolled, fingers sure. He had been staying on the ridge more often now, not because she asked, because he chose to. "You're thinking loud again," he said without looking up. She smiled faintly. "Was I?" "So only when something matters." She turned. "The town won't forget us." "No," he agreed. "But they'll think twice before deciding who you belong to." She crossed the room, leaned against the table. "They still talk. They always will." "Does it bother you?" Ethan set the harness aside, met her eyes. "Used to, when I thought being understood was necessary. And now? Now I'd rather be right than approved." That earned a quiet laugh from her. But Briar Hollow wasn't finished. It never was. The letter arrived on a morning glazed with frost, late enough to surprise, sharp enough to sting. Clara recognized the seal immediately. The bank. Official. Heavy. Ethan read it once, then again. "They're calling in favors," he said, "claiming irregularities, old loans. They want land." Clara felt a familiar tightening in her chest. "The ridge?" "Yes." She didn't hesitate. "No." Ethan's eyes flicked up. Something like pride moved there. "They're testing," he said, "seeing if winter made us soft." "It didn't," she replied. "It taught us where we stand." They rode into town together this time. Spring mud clung to hooves. The streets of Briar Hollow looked smaller than Clara remembered, narrower, less certain. The buildings leaned like they were listening. Inside the bank, the air smelled of ink and nerves. The men tried to speak over her. She didn't let them. "This land was given freely," she said, laying the deed flat on the desk. "Legally, publicly, you have no claim." "You're young," one man said, not unkindly. "You don't understand how these things—" "I understand exactly," Clara interrupted. "Debt, fear, control. I lived under all three." Silence. Ethan said nothing. He didn't need to. The bank backed down by week's end. Word spread fast, not of money, of boundaries. By mid-April, the ridge softened, grass pushed through melting snow. The creek ran high and loud, full of argument and life. Clara spent mornings outside now, hands in dirt, planning a garden that would take its time. Ethan built a second chair for the porch. No one commented on where he slept. One evening, As the sky bruised purple and gold, Clara found him standing at the edge of the ridge, looking down at the valley. "You regret it?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "I regret waiting so long to stop living for everyone else." She stepped beside him. "I regret thinking survival was the same as living." They stood there, the wind gentle now, almost kind. "Do you love me?" she asked. The question wasn't fragile, it was brave. Ethan didn't answer right away. He took her hand, calloused fingers warm. "I love who you are," he said. "Not who you saved, not who you married, who you chose to become." She exhaled, slow. "I love you," she said simply. "Not because you rescued me, but because you let me walk my own way." He turned to her then, the last light catching in his eyes. Winter had stripped them clean. What remained was not obligation. It was choice. Below them, Briar Hollow settled into its routines, smaller now, quieter. The town would remember the story, the way towns always do, warped by distance, shaped by rumor. They would say the girl had been forced. They would say the millionaire had softened. They would never fully understand the gift, but up on the ridge, where snow once ruled and silence tested every truth, a house stood firm, warm, owned, chosen, and inside it lived a woman who had survived winter and decided at last how she would be loved.